I'd like to welcome you to another episode in the series where we explore various subjects such as psychology, philosophy, and history, and tie this in this series to balding, baldness, and hair loss as a case study to represent various concepts and ideas from these various subjects. If you enjoyed this video or any of the previous in the series, be sure to like, comment and subscribe on these in order to help the channel to grow. Thank you.
The psychology of losing your hair. Why balding feels like losing part of yourself. Introduction. Imagine waking up one ordinary morning. You walk into the bathroom, splash water on your face, and glance into the mirror. At first, nothing seems different. Then, almost without thinking, your eyes drift upward. Your hairline, something feels off. Maybe it's just the lighting. Maybe you're imagining it. You brush your hair back, then forward. You lean closer to the mirror. You compare today's reflection with the one you remember from a few years ago. And suddenly, a thought enters your mind that refuses to leave. Am I going bald? For many people, that single question marks the beginning of a deeply emotional journey. Not because hair is essential for survival, not because it changes who we truly are, but because losing it often feels like losing something much bigger. It feels like losing a part of ourselves. And that's what today's video is really about. Not hair, identity. Because the strange truth is this. Hair is made of dead cells. It has no thoughts, no emotions, no memories. Yet somehow, those silent strands become woven into our sense of confidence, youth, attractiveness, and even our place in the world. How can something biologically insignificant become psychologically enormous? Why does watching a few hairs fall into a sink sometimes feel like watching time itself slipping away? Why do some people embrace boldness with confidence while others experience anxiety, grief, or even depression? And perhaps most importantly, what can losing your hair teach you about living a richer, stronger, and more meaningful life? These questions reach far beyond appearance, because if we're honest, every one of us is losing something. Maybe it's hair, maybe it's youth, maybe it's physical strength, maybe it's beauty, maybe it's a career we built our identity around, maybe it's a relationship that once defined us. Life is a curious way of asking the same question over and over again. Who are you when the things you rely on begin to change? Hair simply happens to be one of the first answers many people are forced to confront. Think back to when you were a child. Did you ever worry about your hairline? Probably not. You ran through sprinklers, you climbed trees, you laughed without wondering how your hair looked. At some point, however, something changed. Without realizing it, you began paying attention to your appearance. Maybe classmates made comments. Maybe advertisements taught you what was considered attractive. Maybe social media quietly convinced you that perfection was normal. Little by little, appearance stopped being something you had. It became something you believed you were. Psychologists call this identity fusion, when external characteristics become tightly connected to our sense of self. Instead of saying, I have hair, the unconscious mind begins saying, my hair is part of who I am. Once that happens, losing it no longer feels like a cosmetic change. It feels personal, very personal. Consider something remarkable. If you lose a jacket, you buy another. If your phone breaks, eventually you replace it. If your favorite pair of shoes wears out, you move on. None of these losses fundamentally shake your identity. But hair is different because you don't simply wear it, you grow it. It's been with you through childhood photographs, school graduations, first dates, job interviews, weddings, family holidays. For decades, the same face has looked back at you from every mirror. And then, almost imperceptibly, that familiar face begins to change. Many people aren't mourning the hair, they're mourning familiarity. They're grieving the gradual disappearance of the person they believed themselves to be. That's an entirely different kind of loss. There's another reason balding feels so emotional. It reminds us of something we'd rather avoid thinking about: time. Every hair that falls can feel like a tiny reminder that we're getting older. Not overnight, not dramatically, but undeniably. Modern society spends enormous energy trying to convince us that aging is something to defeat. Creams promise younger skin, supplements promise vitality, advertisements promise that growing older can somehow be delayed if if we buy the right product. Yet every morning, reality quietly tells a different story. Time keeps moving. Hair turns grey, hair becomes thinner, faces become older. The remarkable thing isn't that these changes happen, it's that we're often surprised they do, as if nature somehow broke an agreement it never made. Psychologists often describe grief as something that follows major losses: the death of a loved one, the end of a relationship, the loss of a career. But grief isn't limited to these events. Sometimes we grieve versions of ourselves: the athlete who can no longer compete, the parent whose children have grown up, the musician who loses hearing, the professional forced into retirement, the young man becoming middle-aged. Hair loss can become one of these quiet griefs, not because it's comparable to losing a loved one, but because it symbolises transition, one chapter ending, another beginning. The difficulty isn't the change itself, it's accepting that change has arrived. Here's something fascinating. Two people can experience exactly the same hair loss. One becomes consumed by insecurity, the other simply shaves their head and carries on with life. What's the difference? Is it genetics? It isn't genetics, it isn't appearance, it isn't even confidence, it's meaning. One person sees boldness as proof they're becoming less valuable, the other sees it as nothing more than a natural change. The event is identical, the interpretation is completely different. Modern psychology repeatedly shows that our emotional lives are shaped not only by what happens to us, but by the stories we tell ourselves about what happens. That means the most important conversation isn't happening in front of the mirror, it's happening inside the mind. Think about how often we introduce ourselves without saying a word. Before anyone hears us speak, they see our posture, our expression, our clothes, our hairstyle. Humans are visual creatures. First impressions happen in seconds. Because of this, appearance inevitably influences how we think others perceive us. The danger comes when we allow appearance to determine how we perceive ourselves. These are not the same thing. One is external, the other is deeply internal. Confusing the two can quietly shape decades of our lives. Here's the irony: many people spend years fearing boldness. Then when they finally accept it, they discover something unexpected. Life continues. Friends still laugh with them, family still loves them, meaningful work still matters. Sunsets remain beautiful, books remain inspiring, music still moves them. The things that gave life meaning before hair loss continue giving life meaning afterward. Only one thing has truly changed: the story they were telling themselves. Perhaps that's why losing your hair can become one of life's unexpected teachers, because it asks a question that eventually comes for everyone, not just those who go bald, not just men, everyone. What part of your identity is built on something temporary? It's a question worth sitting with, because whether it's beauty, success, money, health, or youth, life eventually invites us to loosen our grip, not to punish us, but to show us that our deepest value was never found there in the first place. And once we begin to understand that, hair loss stops being merely a cosmetic event. It becomes an invitation to redefine confidence, to rediscover identity, and perhaps for the very first time, to discover who we are beneath everything that can that can take away, that time can take away. Part 2: Why hair matters so much to the human brain. If hair is nothing more than strands of protein growing from our scalp, then why does losing it feel so significant? It's a question that has puzzled psychologists for decades. After all, from a purely biological perspective, humans can survive perfectly well without hair. We don't lose our intelligence, we don't lose our kindness, we don't lose our ability to love, to learn, or to create. And yet, the emotional impact can be profound. The answer lies in the way our brains have evolved, because long before mirrors, social media, or fashion magazines existed, the human brain was already making rapid judgments based on appearance. Those judgments weren't about vanity, they were about survival. The brain is built to notice fears. Imagine walking through a forest thousands of years ago. Every stranger could be a friend or a threat. Every face carried information: age, health, emotion, strength, trustworthiness. The human brain became astonishingly skilled at reading these signals almost instantly. Even today, neuroscientists estimate that we begin forming first impressions with fractions of a second. Without saying a single word, we unconsciously notice posture, facial expressions, eye contact, clothing, and yes, hair. Hair became one of many visual cues the brain associated with youth and vitality. Thick, healthy hair often suggested good health and reproductive fitness. Grey or thinning hair often suggested advancing age. These weren't conscious judgments, they were automatic patterns shaped over thousands of generations. Our ancestors didn't think this person has a symmetrical hairline. Their brains simply made rapid assessments. Those ancient mental shortcuts still influence us today. Even though the modern world has changed dramatically, our brains haven't changed nearly as much. Hair is more than hair. Here's something remarkable. Ask someone to describe themselves. Very often they'll begin with physical characteristics. I'm tall, I'm short, I have blue eyes, I have curly hair. Notice something. These aren't merely descriptions. They're pieces of identity. Psychologists call this our self-schema, the mental blueprint we carry about who we are. It develops gradually throughout life. Every photograph, every compliment, every criticism, every glance in the mirror, every social interaction quietly contributes another brushstroke. Over years, the image becomes so familiar that we rarely question it. Then one day, the reflection begins changing. At first, it's subtle, a slightly higher hairline, a little more scalp showing under bright lights, more hairs left behind in the shower. These changes aren't simply noticed, they're compared. Compared to yesterday, compared to old photographs, compared to the younger version of ourselves, still living vividly in memory. That's why balding often feels so emotional. The mind isn't comparing you to other people, it's comparing you to the past. Mirrors don't just reflect reality. Have you ever noticed how differently two people can look into the same mirror? One sees flaws, the other sees progress. The mirror hasn't changed, the observer has. Psychologists often describe mirrors as emotional amplifiers. They don't merely show our appearance, they activate our beliefs about ourselves. Imagine someone who believes they're becoming less attractive. Every glance into the mirror becomes confirmation. Imagine someone who believes aging is simply part of life. The same reflection tells an entirely different story. The mirror reflects more than your face. It reflects the story you've been telling yourself. Why we compare ourselves. Comparison is one of the oldest habits of the human mind. Our ancestors compared themselves because belonging to the group increased the chances of survival. Being accepted meant protection. Being rejected could mean danger. Although society has changed, that ancient instinct remains. Today, instead of comparing hunting skills, we compare appearances, careers, houses, followers, relationships, hair. Social media has magnified this instinct enormously. Open almost any app and you'll see carefully selected images of people looking confident, youthful and successful. Rarely do you see the anxiety behind those images, or the hours spent creating them, or the filters quietly smoothing reality. The result is predictable. We compare our ordinary lives to everyone else's highlight reel. Psychologists have found that the more frequently people engage in appearance-based comparison, the more likely they are to experience dissatisfaction with their own appearance. Not because they've changed, not because the standard they're measuring against has become realistic. Hair loss simply becomes another chapter in that endless comparison. The spotlight effect. Now here's something fascinating. Imagine walking into a crowded room with a noticeable stain on your shirt. Most people instinctively believe everyone will notice. Psychologists call this the spotlight effect. We consistently overestimate how much attention other people pay to us. The same thing happens with hair. Psychologists call this the spotlight effect. We consistently overestimate how much attention other people pay to us. The same thing happens with hair. Many people experiencing hair loss believe everyone is secretly staring at their scalp, that every conversation begins with someone silently thinking, he's going bald. But reality tells a different story. Most people are occupied by something far more interesting. Themselves. They're worrying about their own appearance, their own problems, their own insecurities. Ironically, while you're wondering if someone noticed your thinning hair, they're wondering whether you notice a spot on their jacket. Understanding this can be incredibly liberating. It reminds us that the harshest observer is often the one staring back from the mirror. Identity is always changing. Perhaps the greatest misunderstanding about identity is believing it's fixed. Think about who you were 10 years ago. Your interests have changed, your priorities have changed, your friendships may have changed, your beliefs may have changed. Almost every part of your life has evolved. Yet we often expect our appearance to remain frozen in time. It's an impossible expectation. Nature doesn't preserve, nature transforms, trees lose leaves, Rivers reshape landscapes. Children become adults. Adults become elders. Hair follows the same rhythm. The difficulty comes when our internal picture refuses to evolve alongside our external reality. Psychologists sometimes describe this as an identity lag. Our minds continue identifying with an earlier version of ourselves long after life has moved forward. That gap creates discomfort. Acceptance begins when the two finally meet. The fear beneath the hair. If we're honest, very few people are actually afraid of losing hair itself. They're afraid of what they believe it represents. Aging, less attractiveness, less confidence, less opportunity, less worth. Hair becomes a symbol, and symbols carry emotional weight far beyond their physical form. Imagine losing a wedding ring. The ring itself may not be valuable, but what it represents certainly is. Hair works similarly. It's rarely just hair. It's a reminder of youth, of identity, of the passage of time. Understanding this doesn't magically remove the emotion, but it helps explain it. And once something is understood, it often becomes less frightening. A different way to see the mirror. Imagine waking up tomorrow morning and looking into the mirror with a different question. Instead of asking, how do I look today? Ask, who am I becoming? One question measures appearance. The other measures growth. One keeps attention fixed on the surface. The other turns it toward the character. The simple shift changes everything, because while appearance will inevitably change, the person you're becoming remains, to a remarkable degree, within your influence. Hair may thin, but patience can deepen. Hair may disappear, but wisdom can grow. Hair may fade, but passion can become stronger than ever. Perhaps that's why some people emerge from hair loss more confident than before. Not because they regained what was lost, but because they discovered something far more valuable underneath it. Part 3. The emotional journey of hair loss, from fear to acceptance. For many people, losing their hair doesn't happen all at once. It happens quietly, so quietly in fact, that the first signs are often dismissed. A few extra hairs in the shower, a little more scalp visible under bright lights, a slightly higher forehead in photographs. At first, it's easy to ignore, but eventually a moment arrives that changes everything. Perhaps it's an old friend saying, have you always had a high hairline? Maybe it's a barber casually mentioning that your hair is becoming thinner, or perhaps it's seeing yourself in a photograph taken from an angle you've never seen before. Whatever the moment is, something shifts, not just on your head, but in your mind. Because from that point onward, you're no longer simply living your life. You're watching yourself change. And psychologically, that can be an incredibly emotional experience. Stage 1, denial. The first stage is almost always denial. It's just stress. It's only temporary. My dad didn't lose his hair until he was 50. Maybe I just need a different shampoo. Denial isn't stupidity, it's protection. Our minds often soften difficult realities until we're emotionally ready to face them. In many areas of life, denial gives us time to adjust, but eventually reality becomes impossible to ignore. The hairline continues moving, the crown becomes thinner, the photographs become harder to dismiss, and the conversation inside the mind begins to change. Stage 2, obsession. Once denial fades, many people enter a period of intense awareness. Hair becomes the first thing they notice every morning. Mirrors become inspections rather than reflections. The bathroom sink becomes evidence. Every loose strand feels significant. Some begin taking weekly photographs. Others spend hours researching treatments online. They compare themselves with celebrities, friends, brothers, strangers. They begin noticing hairlines everywhere. Something fascinating has happened. The brain has developed a filter. Psychologists call this selective attention. When something becomes emotionally important, the brain starts noticing it constantly. Buy a red car, suddenly you see red cars everywhere. Learn a new word, suddenly everyone seems to be using it. Start worrying about your hair. Suddenly every bald man becomes impossible to ignore. The world hasn't changed, your attention has. Stage 3, bargaining. This stage is perhaps the most exhausting. It's filled with what ifs. What if I start treatment now? What if I change my diet? What if I find the perfect haircut? What if no one notices for another few years? There's nothing wrong with exploring treatments if that's your choice. The problem begins when hope quietly becomes a dependency. When happiness depends on reversing something that may never fully reverse. Many people become trapped here for years, not because they're fighting hair loss, because they're fighting uncertainty. Every new product promises possibility. Every online success story creates fresh hope. Every disappointment restarts the cycle. It's emotionally exhausting, not because they're weak, but because they're trying to negotiate with time itself. Stage 4, fear of judgment. At some point, another fear often appears. What will other people think? This question has extraordinary power, not because other people are necessarily judging us, but because we imagine they are. A windy day suddenly feels uncomfortable, swimming becomes stressful, photographs become carefully planned, bright lighting becomes the enemy. Some people stop participating in activities they once loved, not because of hair itself, but because of anticipated embarrassment. Psychologists describe this as anticipatory anxiety. We're not reacting to reality, we're reacting to what we imagine reality might become. And imagined judgment can sometimes feel even more painful than real judgment. The prison of hiding. One of the saddest aspects of hair loss isn't the thinning hair itself, it's the amount of energy spent hiding it. Think about how much mental effort concealment requires: checking mirrors, adjusting hairstyles, avoiding rain, avoiding strong wind, choosing hats based on lighting, positioning yourself carefully in photographs, constantly wondering whether someone has noticed. It's exhausting, not physically, mentally, because every act of hiding quietly reinforces one dangerous belief. If people see the real me, something is wrong. Over time, the hairstyle stops protecting confidence, begins protecting insecurity. There's an important difference. One gives freedom, the other quietly removes it. The turning point. Then something unexpected happens, usually not dramatically, not overnight, just gradually. Many people reach a point where they become tired, not tired of losing hair, tired of worrying, tired of checking, tired of pretending, tired of organizing life around concealment. Psychologists often describe this as acceptance, but acceptance is frequently misunderstood. Acceptance is not giving up, it is giving up the struggle against reality. Imagine carrying a heavy backpack for years. Eventually, your shoulders begin to ache. Then one day, you simply put it down. Reality hasn't changed, only the burden has. Acceptance feels remarkably similar. Why acceptance creates confidence. Here's one of psychology's greatest paradoxes. Confidence often appears after acceptance, not before it. Many people believe they'll become confident once they stop losing hair. Yet countless bold men report the opposite experience. They became confident once they stopped fighting it. Why? Because uncertainty disappeared. They no longer woke each morning wondering, can I hide it today? There was nothing left to hide. And strangely, the honesty became liberating. Real confidence rarely comes from looking perfect. It comes from no longer needing to appear perfect. The mirror becomes different. Imagine looking into the mirror after finally accepting your appearance. For the first time in years, you're not searching for evidence. You're simply seeing yourself. This is a profound psychological shift. The mirror stops being a courtroom, it becomes a window. You're no longer putting yourself on trial every morning. You're simply beginning your day. That single change can free enormous amounts of emotional energy that can now be invested elsewhere. Relationships, health, learning, purpose, living. The unexpected gift. Many people who have fully accepted hair loss describe something surprising. They become less judgmental of other people's imperfections. Why? Because of experienced vulnerability themselves. They understand what it's like to feel exposed, to feel uncertain, to wonder whether they're enough. And that understanding often creates empathy. Hair loss teaches a lesson that extends far beyond appearance. Everyone is carrying something. The person with perfect hair may be battling anxiety. The successful entrepreneur may feel profoundly lonely. The athlete may fear injury. The smiling stranger may be grieving quietly. We rarely know what battles another person is fighting. Hair loss reminds us that visible appearances reveal only a tiny fraction of someone's story. A new definition of strength. When we're young, we often think strength means control, controlling outcomes, controlling appearance, controlling success. As life unfolds, we begin discovering a different definition. Strength is adapting, strength is continuing despite change. Strength is allowing life to reshape us without allowing it to diminish us. Perhaps that's why so many people eventually describe hair loss as strangely transformative, not because they wanted it, not because it was enjoyable, but because it forced them to ask deeper questions. Questions they may never have asked otherwise. Who am I beyond my appearance? What truly makes me valuable? What parts of my life can take Can time never take away? Those are life's real questions. Hair simply becomes the invitation to ask them. Part 4. The hidden lessons balding can teach us. By now, we've explored why losing your hair can feel so desperately personal. We've looked at the psychology behind identity. We've seen how the brain connects appearance to self-worth. We followed the emotional journey from denial to acceptance. But now we arrive at perhaps the most surprising part of the story. Because sometimes the experience we resist the most become the experiences that transform us the most. Hair loss is rarely something anyone asks for. Few people celebrate the first signs of a receding hairline. Almost no one hopes to watch their appearance change before they feel ready. And yet, if you speak to people who have fully accepted it, many will tell you something unexpected. I actually became a stronger person because of it. At first, that sounds impossible. How can losing something make you stronger? The answer lies in what the experience quietly asks of you. It asks you to let go, and letting go is one of the hardest psychological skills any human being can learn. Lesson 1. You are not your reflection. Imagine standing in front of a mirror. How long do you spend looking at yourself each day? 30 seconds, 5 minutes, longer? Now ask yourself a different question. How much of your self-worth comes from what that mirror shows you? For many people, the answer is uncomfortable. Without realizing it, we've allowed the mirror to become a judge, a daily performance review. Do I still look young? Do I still look attractive? Do I still look successful? But mirrors have a limitation. They only reflect surfaces. They cannot reflect kindness. They cannot reflect courage. They cannot reflect loyalty. They cannot reflect wisdom. Those qualities remain invisible. Yet they are often the very qualities people remember most. Think about the people you admire. Do you remember them because of their hairstyle? Or because of the way they treated others? Because of their generosity, their resilience, their integrity? The mirror cannot measure the things that matter most. Perhaps it's time we stopped asking it to. Lesson 2. Confidence is an inside job. One of the biggest misconceptions in modern culture is that confidence comes from appearance. We're constantly shown images of perfect faces, perfect bodies, perfect smiles, perfect hair. The message is subtle but persistent. Look better and you'll feel better. Sometimes that's true. Looking after yourself is healthy. Taking pride in your appearance is perfectly reasonable. But there's a crucial difference between caring about your appearance and depending on it. Imagine someone who feels confident only when everything looks perfect. Perfect outfit, perfect haircut, perfect lighting, perfect photograph. How resilient is that confidence? Not very. Because the moment one of those things changes, confidence disappears with it. Real confidence works differently. Real confidence isn't built on perfection, it's built on trust. Trust that you'll be okay even when life changes. Trust that your worth doesn't vanish with your youth. Trust that you remain enough even when the mirror evolves. That's the confidence that lasts. Lesson 3. Authenticity is more attractive than perfection. Have you ever met someone who seemed completely comfortable in their own skin? Perhaps they weren't the most conventionally attractive person in the room, yet people naturally gravitated toward them. Why? Because authenticity has a magnetic quality. Psychologists have long observed that people are drawn to authenticity, not because authentic people are flawless, because they're real. They aren't exhausting themselves trying to become someone else. Hair loss often forces authenticity. At some point, many people stop pretending. They stop arranging life around concealment. They stop apologizing for nature. And something remarkable happens. They begin living more honestly. Ironically, that honesty often makes them appear more confident than years of trying to hide ever did, because authenticity removes an enormous psychological burden, the burden of performance. Lesson 4. Comparison is a game you can never win. Imagine entering a room with 100 people. No matter how you look, someone will have thicker hair, someone will be younger, taller, wealthier, will appear more successful. Comparison has no finish line. The human mind always finds another benchmark. Social media has intensified this tendency. We're constantly exposed to carefully edited lives, perfect holidays, relationships, appearances, but comparison is deeply unfair. You're comparing your ordinary Tuesday morning to someone else's carefully selected highlight reel. Hair loss often exposes the futility of this habit because eventually you realize there will always be someone with more hair. The more important question becomes, am I becoming a better version of myself? That's a comparison worth making. Yesterday's you, today's you, tomorrow's you. Everything else is noise. Lesson 5. Vulnerability creates strength. Most people associate vulnerability with weakness. Psychology suggests something different. Research consistently shows that people who are willing to acknowledge imperfections often build deeper relationships. Why? Because vulnerability creates trust. Think about the conversations that have changed your life. They probably weren't the ones where someone pretended everything was perfect. They were the conversations where someone admitted fear, failure, heartbreak, uncertainty. Hair loss is a curious way of making people more compassionate. Once you've experienced insecurity yourself, you become slower to judge others. You begin noticing the hidden struggles behind confident faces. You realize that everyone is carrying something. Some burdens are simply easier to see than others. Lesson 6. Acceptance frees enormous energy. Imagine carrying a heavy suitcase every day. At first, you hardly notice the weight. Over time, it becomes exhausting. Then someone points out that the suitcase is empty. You've been carrying it simply because you've grown used to it. Many people carry invisible emotional suitcases: constant worry, endless comparison, fear of judgment, the need to impress, the pressure to remain young, forever young. Acceptance is like putting the suitcase down. The circumstances may remain the same, but your relationship with them changes completely. Suddenly there's space to think, space to create, space to love, space to enjoy ordinary moments without constantly evaluating yourself. Many people who fully embrace boldness say they feel lighter, not because they've solved every problem, because they've stopped carrying one that never needed carrying. Lesson 7. Your greatest qualities improve with age. Hair may thin, but patience often grows. Appearance may change, but wisdom deepens. Physical strength may decline, but emotional resilience can become stronger than ever. Think about the people who advise you value most. They're rarely the youngest person in the room. They're often the people who have endured disappointment, loss, failure, change. These experiences don't automatically make someone wise, but when approached thoughtfully, they often become life's greatest teachers. Hair loss can be one of those teachers. It quietly reminds us that life isn't asking us to preserve youth forever. It's asking us to mature, to become someone whose value isn't measured by appearance, but by presence. The unexpected freedom. There's a moment many people describe after finally accepting their changing appearance. It isn't dramatic. No music plays, no audience applauds. It's simply a quiet realization. I don't need to keep fighting this anymore. That realization changes more than a hairstyle. It changes perspective. You begin spending less time wondering what strangers think, more time enjoying conversations, less time studying old photographs, more time creating new memories, less time chasing the person you used to be, more time appreciating the person you're becoming. Perhaps that's the hidden gift. Hair loss teaches us that identity isn't something we preserve, it's something we continually create, not through appearance, but through choices, through kindness, through courage, through the way we meet life's inevitable changes. And once you understand that, the mirror slowly loses its power because it can only reflect your face. It can never reflect the person you've become. Part 5. 10 powerful lessons from losing your hair. We spent this journey exploring something that millions of people experience, but very few openly discuss. At first glance, losing your hair seems like a physical change, a cosmetic issue, something that belongs in the world of barbers, mirrors, and grooming products. But by now, we've discovered something much deeper. Hair loss is rarely just about hair. It's about identity. It's about change. It's about learning how to remain at peace when life slowly begins rewriting the image we've carried of ourselves for years. And in many ways, that makes balding one of life's greatest teachers. Not because it's enjoyable, not because anyone hopes for it, but because it forces us to confront questions that eventually come for every human being. Questions about aging, about attachment, about self-worth, about what truly makes a life meaningful. So as we conclude, here are 10 powerful lessons that losing your hair can teach. Not just about appearance, but about living well. Lesson 1. Everything changes. One of the hardest truths to accept is also one of the simplest. Nothing stays the same. Hair changes, bodies change, careers change, relationships change, children grow up, parents grow old, even our personalities evolve over time. Yet we spend enormous amounts of energy wishing life would remain exactly as it is. The problem isn't change. The problem is our expectation that change shouldn't happen. Once we stop resisting the natural rhythm of life, we stop fighting battles we were never meant to win. Acceptance doesn't weaken us, it frees us. Lesson 2, your identity must be bigger than your appearance. Imagine building your entire house on a single pillar. What happens when that pillar weakens? Everything becomes unstable. Many people unknowingly build their identity on appearance. If I look young, I'm valuable. If I look attractive, I'm confident. If I lose those things, who am I? Hair loss quietly exposes this fragile foundation. It invites us to build something stronger, not on appearance, but on character, on integrity, on compassion, on curiosity. These are qualities that deepen with time instead of disappearing. Lesson 3, confidence is the ability to be seen as you are. Many people think confidence means feeling fearless. It doesn't. Confidence means being willing to show up despite fear. Think about the first time someone stopped hiding their thinning hair, stopped adjusting every photograph, stopped worrying about every gust of wind, stopped wondering what strangers might think. Nothing miraculous happened. The world kept turning, but internally everything changed because confidence wasn't waiting on the other side of perfect hair. It was waiting on the other side of acceptance. The strongest confidence isn't built by becoming flawless. It's built by no longer believing you have to be. Lesson 4. Most people are thinking about themselves. One of the greatest psychological discoveries we've discussed is the spotlight effect. We assume everyone notices our imperfections, but the truth is surprisingly comforting. Most people are busy worrying about their own. The person you're convinced is judging your hair may actually be worried about their weight, or their wrinkles, or their career, or their family. Everyone is carrying invisible concerns. Realizing this is incredibly liberating. It reminds us that we're free to stop performing for an audience that largely isn't watching. Lesson 5. Comparison has no finish line. Comparison promises improvement. In reality, it often produces dissatisfaction. There will always be someone younger, someone wealthier, someone with thicker hair, someone more successful. If your happiness depends on being first in every category, you'll spend your life changing an impossible finish line. Real growth begins when comparison changes direction. Instead of asking, am I better than someone else? Ask, am I becoming better than I was yesterday? That question leads to peace instead of anxiety. Lesson 6. What you resist often controls you. Think about how much energy people spend resisting inevitable things. Aging, failure, criticism, change. The more desperately we resist reality, the more power it seems to gain over us. Hair loss teaches a profound psychological truth. Sometimes freedom doesn't come from changing reality. It comes from changing our relationship with reality. The moment we stop fighting every wave, we finally learn how to swim. Lesson 7. Authenticity is more powerful than perfection. Perfection creates admiration. Authenticity creates connection. There's a reason people remember genuine conversations more than polished performances. They remember honesty. They remember courage. They remember someone who wasn't afraid to be real. Hair loss often strips away the illusion that we must always appear perfect. And what's left behind is something surprisingly attractive: authenticity, the freedom to stop pretending, the freedom to simply be yourself. Lesson 8. Adversity often reveals hidden strength. Think back to the greatest periods of growth in your life. Were they the easiest years? Probably not. Growth usually arrives disguised as difficulty. A failed relationship teaches resilience. A career setback teaches adaptability. Illness teaches gratitude. Hair loss teaches acceptance. Life has an extraordinary habit of hiding its greatest lessons inside uncomfortable experiences, not because suffering is inherently good, but because struggle often reveals strengths we never knew we possessed. Lesson 9. Time takes many things, but it cannot take everything. One day, all of us will lose something: our youth, our speed, our appearance, our certainty. These losses are part of being human. But there are qualities time cannot simply remove: kindness, wisdom, humility, integrity, the ability to encourage another person, the courage to remain hopeful, the capacity to love. Those are choices, and choices remain available long after appearances begin to fade. That's why some people become more beautiful with age, not physically, humanly. Lesson 10. The person you become matters more than the person you were. Perhaps this is the greatest lesson of all. Many people spend years trying to preserve an earlier version of themselves: the younger face, the thicker hair, the old photographs. But life isn't asking us to remain who we were. It's asking us to become who we're capable of being. Imagine a tree in autumn. If it desperately clung to every leaf, it could never prepare for spring. Letting go isn't failure, it's part of growth. The same is true for us. Every stage of life asks us to release something: childhood, youth, certainty, appearance, and each time we let go, we create space for something new. A final reflection. Imagine two people standing in front of the same mirror. One sees only loss, the other sees transformation. The first asks, "Why is this happening to me?" The second asks, "What is this experience trying to teach me?" That single question changes everything, because life is constantly teaching. Sometimes through joy, sometimes through disappointment, sometimes through success, sometimes through loss. Hair loss happens to be one of those unexpected classrooms. It reminds us that identity cannot safely be built upon anything temporary, not appearance, not youth, not status, not success. Because eventually time asks us to release every one of those things. But here's the beautiful part: time only takes what was never meant to last. It cannot take your compassion, it cannot take your wisdom, it cannot take your courage, it cannot take your capacity to grow. Those qualities are cultivated from within, and unlike hair, they often become richer with every passing year. So perhaps the question was never, "How do I stop losing my hair?" Perhaps the better question has always been, "Who am I becoming as life changes me?" Because that is the question every human being must answer, not just through experiencing hair loss. All of us, every wrinkle, every grey hair, every scar, every disappointment, every success, each one quietly shapes the person we become. And when we finally understand that, we stop seeing the mirror as the place where our worth is decided. Instead, we begin seeing it for what it truly is: a reflection of a face, not a measure of life. So the next time you look into the mirror, remember this: your hair may tell the story of passing time, but your character tells the story of how you choose to spend it. And in the end, that is the story people will remember. Not the thickness of your hair, not the shape of your hairline, but the kindness you showed, the courage you displayed, the wisdom you shared, and the life you lived. Thank you for watching. If this video helped you see hair loss and perhaps yourself from a different perspective, consider sharing it with someone who may be quietly going through the same journey. And if you'd like more videos exploring psychology, philosophy, resilience, and the timeless lessons hidden within everyday life, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Until next time, remember, time changes our appearance, experience shapes our character, and the strongest part of who you are is the part that no mirror can ever reflect.